Hello everyone, my name is Kong Shrinani and welcome to my YouTube channel, Neuro Chat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism, late autism diagnosis, and autism in women and girls. I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists and seek their views and updates on their latest work and research. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Lastly, keeping inclusivity as a topmost priority, we might also discuss controversial disparate views for a collective understanding of issues and respect for diverse views. All the views and topics discussed are for informational purposes only. If you are interested in watching more quality content on this topic, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to press the bell icon to be notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Please also share the channel with your friends, family, and social media platforms. Thank you. Dr. Alycia Halladay is the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation and is pivotal in guiding and supporting cutting-edge autism research. With a background in psychology and neuroscience, Dr. Halladay has been a leading advocate for advancing evidence-based practices and interventions in the autism community. She is known for her efforts in bridging the gap between scientific research and the needs of individuals with autism and their families, ensuring that research translates into meaningful real-world applications. Her work promotes a deeper understanding of autism, fostering collaboration among researchers, practitioners, and advocates globally. She also produces a weekly podcast aimed at explaining scientific information to the public. Dr. Halladay, welcome, and thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
And to kind of jump right into that discussion, could you start by telling us about your journey to becoming the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation and how you got involved and started working in autism research?
Absolutely. So I got started in this as actually when I was a graduate student in the Department of Biopsychology and Behavioral Neuroscience. It's okay if I age myself. Around 1998 or 1999, there was this kind of idea that was published early on, very preliminary. We now know it probably was overhyped, that the thimerosal, which is a additive that used to be added to vaccines, was what was causing autism, right? So there was this preliminary, there were 10 kids in the sample, there was this hypothesis that it led to gut problems, and then also the regression seen in individuals with autism. So the United States government and other governments around the world were very interested in this question, and they actually funded 2 centers for excellence for environmental health to focus on this question. One was at UC Davis and one was at Rutgers, and I was part of the one at Rutgers. So I used my animal models of psychiatric disorders, which I had been learning about as a graduate student, and used that when I was a postdoctoral fellow. And I focused, of course, as I moved into looking at thimerosal. Thimerosal is a form of mercury. So it's an environmental toxicant. So I gained some expertise in pharmacology and toxicology, and I'm still associated with the department over there at Rutgers. And I'm very proud of that. And so from there, I got involved in autism research and decided at some point, either during my postdoc or then I was also a research assistant professor, that I wanted to continue in that. I didn't necessarily want to go into toxicology research, although it's fascinating and I still consider myself somewhat of a toxicologist, that I wanted to stay in autism. So that led me to a job at the National Alliance for Autism Research, where I was the science director, looking at kind of the bigger picture of not just animals with autism, but people with autism and their needs, which soon after I joined merged with Autism Speaks. And I served at Autism Speaks in various roles until I left Autism Speaks to become the Chief Science Officer of the Autism Science Foundation in 2014. And I have been at Autism Science Foundation for 10 years now. So I'm also very proud of that. And I also have, in the middle of all this, I'll just add, in the middle of all this, I had twin girls. So, I had twin girls, and one of them was diagnosed with autism when she was 3. And frankly, I was actually I wasn't really in denial about it. I kind of thought, what are the chances? What are the chances? What are the chances? And it wasn't until many people pushed me into getting a formal evaluation for her significant challenges that were happening. And, basically it was her daycare saying, we can't handle this anymore. So then I became a parent as well as a scientist looking at autism.
Thank you for sharing all that. ASF has been influential in advancing autism research and advocacy. So what are some of the foundation's key achievements during your time there?
So, yeah, I mean, one of the things that we strongly believe in is not just supporting the science, which we absolutely do, but we want to do it in a way that fosters the development of new researchers, right? So one of the things we hear about all the time is there's not enough people studying autism. There's not enough scientific findings. There's not enough people researching it, learning the skills, even becoming clinicians. There's just not enough of them. So we combine the importance of the scientific research question with a training opportunity. So we fund predoctoral and postdoctoral fellows, and we also fund undergraduates and post-undergraduates. We've also funded early career researchers, so people that after they've completed their postdoc, to expand their knowledge and become trained as autism researchers so they stay in the field and contribute at the same time to really high quality science. So when we evaluate grants, we do it not just on the science, which is very important. If it's not a well-designed study, we're not going to fund it. But we get a lot of well-designed studies, and so then we end up supporting those that in which the researcher, the fellow, or the young trainee is most likely to get a great experience and to learn a number of things across the field of autism and want to stay in autism research. And we found that a really high percent of them, around 80% of the ones that we funded, have stayed in the autism field 5 years after they finished their fellowship. So that can be either they're continuing their education, or they got a tenure track position, or they're a clinician in some way, helping families. And then we also fund different scientific initiatives. So collaborations, as you mentioned, one of them is the Baby Siblings Research Consortium, which is a group of over 50 researchers from around the world that study autism in individuals who have a high probability of receiving a diagnosis. So those are siblings who, instead of having a 1 in 36 chance, it's a 1 in 5 chance. And then premature infants, which is about, depending on the study, about a 1 in 10 chance or a 1 in 8, depending on the study. And then also those with a known genetic disorder. So infants are now able to be diagnosed with a known genetic disorder associated with autism as early as birth, right? And so those kids need to be monitored and put into intervention programs as soon as possible. And I don't know if you can see me today. I'm wearing my Phelan Lucky shirt because today is Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Awareness Day, which is a disorder that is one of the disorders that has the highest contributions to autism. So a high percentage of people have a mutation in this particular, one of the highest percentages. So it's like 1%, but that's still pretty high given the diversity of autism, which I know we're going to talk about, of people with autism have this particular mutation.
That's something I did not know. So, wow.
Yeah. And then we also support a collaboration of researchers and also patient advocacy organizations that support families with rare genetic disorders. We support a program. We collaborate, as you mentioned. We really put a high value on collaboration. We collaborate with other autism foundations to understand if the experiences of siblings. It's called SAM-SIB Stick Together. And you can find a website on that. So I'm probably missing something that we're doing, but one of the main things is supporting early career investigators, because we feel or believe strongly that you can continue to fund science, and a lot of people do that. Not a lot of people fund the career development and ensuring that people who want to continue to help people with autism have the resources to do so.
And are there any emerging trends or breakthroughs in autism research that you believe will have a significant impact in the coming years?
So every day, my answer will change tomorrow. By the way, I'm going to say a few things now, but my answer will change tomorrow when I read a news story or read a news study. I think one of the things that I'm noticing a lot of, and we're funding research on this, and I think it's really important, is the use of different technologies. So any way that you can measure things like heart rate and skin conductance, we're finding those help maybe predict severe, intense, and dangerous behaviors. Technologies that have to do with determining biological markers of autism, whether that's different brain imaging techniques or other sorts of blood-based assays to help diagnose and then help understand each individual person with autism. So autism is a huge, what is called by scientists, heterogeneous genius condition, which means that not people experience it in different ways. And I know we're going to talk about this, but some people suffer from symptoms of autism and some people identify with features of autism. So it's such a huge umbrella that encompasses so many different abilities and disabilities. We really want to make sure that people who need help with specific things get that help. And then people who identify with autism and have enormous strengths, that we recognize those as well. So knowing all that, we need to do a better job about kind of making sure that people are getting the help they need and the recognition they need at the same time. And so we're thinking about biological markers, and those can be through, I guess, the wearables that I mentioned, or also through other kind of lab-based techniques. The other thing that I get excited about is cell-based models. So these are ways that scientists just in the past 10 years have been able to take a blood cell and turn it into a brain cell. And I won't get into the details, but I have someone, if you want to interview them, they'd be fabulous. Take some sort of cell, turn it into a brain cell, and then you can look at in a dish how that brain cell acts, how it projects, how it connects to other brain cells, which we know is part of the core biological features of autism. And so if we can recapitulate that in a dish and better understand that under controlled situations, that's really, really exciting and something that I don't think people were able to do. Maybe they were able to do it 10 years ago, but it's really relatively new, that some of this research. So I think that that's actually really exciting too.
These are all some really interesting things. And also autism is as you just mentioned, it's a highly diverse condition, and the community is very, very broad. So how does ASF address the varying needs and concerns of different subgroups? Late diagnosed adults versus nonverbal children. There's so much variation.
Yeah, and again, that's a problem and an opportunity at the same time, right? Because it is so diverse. You can get people with the same kind of core features, but have so many things around them that may be different. So the core features can be different as well. So someone can have, let's say, awkward but odd speech, right? So they may scream everything, right? Or they may not be able to have like a traditional conversation, but they may, use a different tone. That may make them a little bit odd, and you'd have to kind of like readjust your thinking about how to have a conversation. But there are also people that have minimal speech. They can't even verbally communicate their own basic needs, like I'm hungry, or I need to go to the bathroom, right? So, or they're in pain. You have people who are, by any means, exceptionally gifted cognitively. They have standard IQs in the very, very high range. These are individuals who you will see on TV, like the Good Doctor, who go to medical school, other places where they are lawyers or they're mathematicians or anything like that. And then you have people who are severely cognitively disabled, right? You can't leave them alone for 5 minutes because of safety concerns, and these safety concerns are real, right? So because they sometimes don't communicate verbally, they express themselves in other ways. Sometimes those ways are darting out the door and running down the street, not knowing where they're going. So the autism does, encompass a wide range, and also comorbid features of autism. So things like intellectual disability, cognitive function is not a core feature of autism. Language and social communication is. but cognitive ability isn't. Also motor ability. So some people, have completely intact motor function. Other people have problems putting one foot in front of the other, and this severely limits them. And also, just basic language, as we talked about. So there have been some attempts over the years, and there has been one recently, to kind of categorize different groups of people. And the goal is to make sure everyone is getting the supports that they need, whether that's employment supports, whether that's medical supports, pharmacological supports, residential care, housing, whatever it is, that we make sure that we're sensitive to the needs of the entire spectrum. So there has been an effort. The Lancet published a study a couple of years ago suggesting that one of the ways that we create a subgroup is through the nomenclature profound autism, or the label profound autism. And these are individuals who have a severe cognitive disability. Their IQ is less than 50. Intellectually disabled, your IQ is less than 70. So this is even more extreme than that. And those that have little or no language. So these are people that can't maybe they have a few words, and that's okay, but sometimes they can't express their daily needs. Most likely, although it's not part of the definition, most likely these individuals also exhibit severe, intense, and dangerous behaviors. That can be eating things that they shouldn't be eating, aggression to themselves, to caregivers, self-injury, and then also wandering. So they wandering or elopement, where they take off and because they don't understand the concept of safety, they end up we talked about some tragic situations earlier, kids running into bodies of water because they like the feeling of water, but they don't know how to swim. So those can be very, very tragic situations. So ASF funds the spectrum of autism research, not just those with profound autism, but we have a special mechanism for profound. And we also fund basic science, model systems, epidemiology, neurobiology, clinical trials, and those sorts of studies as well, to help those across the spectrum.
And regarding evidence-based practices, could you discuss some of the most effective interventions that have emerged, or support services that have emerged in the recent years?
Yeah, so emerged in the recent years, I think the applied behavioral analysis techniques have been around for a while. They have started to become different, right? So what used to be traditional ABA, which we all learn by ABA, right? ABA is just consequences of behavior. How do we all learn to get potty trained? Or most of us learn to get potty trained through ABA. You get rewarded for going to the bathroom on the toilet. You maybe somebody says, okay, well, you're not getting a candy, you didn't go on the toilet. Anything from learning how to drive, right, to learning, okay, well, this is a signal, you need to pay attention to this signal, because if you do, you'll get to your location. If you don't, you might get in an accident. So using some of those techniques on individuals with autism to promote learning and social and communication and skills that people just need to have regardless of where you are in life. So I know that ABA, people think of ABA as one thing, but more recent studies, which are called natural developmental behavioral interventions, use the principles of ABA and ABA to allow individuals with autism to tell them what they need. And then also are very person-centric. One thing may not work with everyone. Not everyone may want a food reinforcer. Not everyone may have the same reinforcer. Maybe some people learn different ways. And so it's using those person-led kind of cues to develop more developmentally appropriate interventions, right? So people can learn at any age, but yet we know that there's this period of plasticity early on in life. So, anywhere between birth and say 5 years, although again, I don't want to limit it at 5 years, but these are ages that are critical for kids to receive training to interventions to help them maximize their learning potential. So I think the understanding that some of those interventions are critical in early life, and that also that they encompass a range of things. They're not just people have a vision of what ABA is when it's really not that, or not that anymore. And then I would also say what's encouraging, there's only 2 FDA approved treatments for for autism. And that's not even to treat the core symptoms of autism. That's to treat aggression and hyperactivity, which, by the way, are important things in families. The aggression can be devastating. So those are important things, but there aren't a lot of therapeutics. And so, pushing those into practice is really, really important. And the way things become evidence-based is that they're tried over and over again and replicated. And that's actually one of the prerequisites of having an FDA approved compound. Same thing goes for behavioral studies, is that as the evidence starts to amass around certain practices, we don't talk about this and this and this as being the only one. We're talking about combinations of different behavioral therapies, including speech therapy, occupational therapy, and medicine. So, really trying to make sure that has enough of an evidence base. Some of the early studies were promising. Now we're showing more promise with them and more evidence that they work. But they don't seem to work in everyone. So that's why, again, it's important to understand what works in what person at what time point, right? Because certain behavioral interventions are not going to be effective for certain behaviors. That person in mind may be exhibiting those behaviors. So they're going to get a completely different set of interventions and supports. We need to better understand at the get-go, rather than just doing trial and error, what is potentially going to work in this person? What's going to help them the most? And that can be a variety of things across the lifespan. I know I focus on those early years, but really people's needs change over time, right? So 5-year-olds are not worried about getting a job. 18-year-olds are worried about getting a job. So those are, some of the things that may change over time.
What role do you see technology playing in the future of autism interventions and support?
So, yeah, again, I'll reinforce that I think that this is really, really an important area and a way ASF kind of looks to other fields. So engineering, medicine, biochemistry, all of these different fields that may not be studying autism, but have like an exciting technology. So there was a device called Early Point that was approved. I say it was just approved, but it was approved a year ago to help individuals or help clinics diagnose autism using visual attention cues. So what are kids paying attention to in a visual scene? They can track that and then turn that into an algorithm to determine the probability of having an autism diagnosis. This can be revolutionary in terms of making sure kids get diagnosed with autism and making sure in a timely way, and making sure that a number of different physicians, not just those, that have not just developmental behavioral pediatricians, but other doctors have the ability to at least identify those who need a further evaluation and get that autism diagnosis. Technology has been critical even during the pandemic, right? So use of telehealth and telecommunications to interact with therapists. There's something called the Autism Navigator, which allows families to learn on a video-based platform how to help their child in the context of their own home, right? Because during this was enabled way before COVID, but it really took off during COVID because families couldn't get to their appointments, right? So they had to use things like Zoom and other sorts of video-based platforms. And then I mentioned, smartphones and wearables and apps, right? They have really revolutionized the ability for us to get data from families when they're at home, which is where they normally are, right? You wouldn't expect the same thing to happen in a clinic than as at home. So they can happen in a variety of settings, and then also deliver, different technologies or different supports remotely, both facilitated by a clinician or even independent of a clinician. So I think, we're not going to get any less technologically able in the future, and so we should embrace it and utilize technology to our advantage. And I've also seen, on the same token, I've seen social media play a huge role in bringing together families who may not have been able to identify each other otherwise. So, I like to rag on social media, but in fact, it has been integral in kind of bringing families together with a common goal.
How has public perception of autism changed over the years? So do you think we're moving in a positive direction regarding acceptance and understanding?
I think the way autism is not just perceived, but the way that it's been diagnosed has been changing, right? So if you look at autism, let's say in the 1960s or 70s, that most people with autism were the ones that you would immediately recognize, right? So some people call this waiting room autism, where you know you meet them in a place, you meet them somewhere, and you know that they have autism, right? So they may be nonverbal, they may be stimming, they may have immediate recognizable signs, right, of autism. And then that was the autism that was originally, that was what people thought of as autism. I think with changes in some of the diagnostic techniques or the diagnostic criteria, I should say, and then also greater awareness through public campaigns, awareness campaigns like Learn the Signs, and then also the Autism Speaks, campaigns around awareness, that more people with autism have been identified, right? And so it's changed the way we've thought about autism. So what we thought of as autism, again, let's say 70s, 80s, whatever, 90s, the prevalence of autism has changed because in part, not totally, but we know more about what some of the features of autism are that may not be so obvious. And that there are individuals who may have been diagnosed with autism in the last 5 years that wouldn't have been diagnosed with autism in the last 40 years. Now, with that comes some disadvantages, right? Because as the number of people who are able to speak for themselves and are cognitively able are more represented in an autism research, we're seeing less representation of those who may be more impaired, right, or more profoundly affected. So I think that while it's great and that people can put a diagnosis or a label on their struggles, I think that we need to continue to balance the fact that we're seeing them more in the media, they're more visible now, and that's great. But on the other hand, we don't want to ignore the people that may have, severe disabilities in many aspects. So I think that it's a good thing. So it's the perception has changed, and so I think that's a good thing. But we also want to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind.
Another question I had that just came to mind was like I think back then, earlier years, right, there was autism and then there was kind of Asperger's, and now people realize they're not really two separate conditions. Well, I mean, by that I don't mean that they're not different things, because autism has a range and everything, but people used to think these were two very distinct conditions. So what caused that, I guess, change or realization that that this is just part of one spectrum?
Well, I think science, actually. So someone was astute enough, and there was a paper published that somebody was astute enough, I can send you the link, to notice that, what somebody was, so I guess in the last version of what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, it defined what was autism, what was Asperger's, what was what's called PDD-NOS, and what's called childhood disintegrative disorder, and called them all part of autism. What scientists were well-intentioned, these were not people that were sloppy, they were not careless in their diagnosis, they were considerate and well-trained, that the way one person would interpret the features of autism or the symptoms of autism as Asperger's, another person would call it autism. A third person may call it PDD-NOS. And again, these are people that have been trained, well-intentioned, want to help the community. They aren't slackers, but they just were diagnosing differently based on the criteria. And so it was a little unfair to tell people, oh, well, you get this service because you have autism, but you don't get this service because you have Asperger's. So the decision was made to say, from a scientific standpoint, they need to be grouped together. And then also from an advocacy and services standpoint, because certain states were not offering the same level of care to people with an Asperger's or a PDD diagnosis. Now, I have to say, when that was done, the Asperger's community really got upset. They didn't want to lose that identity of Asperger's. And so, the agreement was, that's okay. You keep whatever identity you want. If you want to identify as PDD or Asperger, that's fine. But as far as the psychological community is concerned, they all fall under the autism umbrella. I think as an unfortunate consequence of that, people who may not have been diagnosed are previously are, which is great, but at the same time, there may be some that are left behind because now people feel that autism is something that it actually isn't. It's more, you see things on TV like The Good Doctor, you see, and I love this show, by the way, Young Sheldon, Love on the Spectrum. These are individuals that are very independent. That's unfortunately what we see as a lot of people interpreting autism to be. That is part of autism, but it's not the only part of autism. And we just need to recognize all the different facets of autism.
And would you say that's one of the biggest misconceptions about autism? Are there any others that you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on who you talk to, right? So I've talked to people that say, oh, you can't say autism spectrum disorder because people don't like that. Well, in fact, there are people that recognize that there's a disorder part of that. There are other people that don't want the word disorder affiliated with that. That's a misconception that every person wants to be referred to in the same way. There's a misconception that people want to all use identity first language. They all want to be called autistic blank. That's not true. Science has shown that there's a diversity of perspectives on that. And it's not just whether you're a parent or a caregiver versus a self-advocate. Self-advocates themselves have a diversity of how they want to be referred to. So I think the perception is that there is just one version of autism. There are many different, I guess, flavors of autism. So when you see people portrayed in the media, that may be accurate, but it may not be accurate for the entire autism spectrum.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, no, that's fine. There's probably other misconceptions. Maybe you can tell me what you think, what might be a common misconception about autism. Maybe that it's caused by vaccines. It's not. Some of the regions of the brain that we know about that are integral with autism, you start to see some of the differences even prenatally. So it's nothing that happened. It's not because of a refrigerator mother. It's not some singular event. That you can actually see changes in the brain as young as 6 months of age, which is way before a behavioral diagnosis can be made. So this isn't something that was caused by anything. There's a variety of genetic and environmental factors involved, which could partially explain why people across the spectrum are so different, because there may be different genetics or different environmental factors or a combination of them. So maybe those are some misconceptions. Hit me up with misconceptions.
No, I think you covered a lot of them. Another big one, I think that, this is something that I found about pretty recently too, as well, is autism in girls is like very underdiagnosed currently. And now a lot more girls are being discovered as having autism, in their late teens, early adulthood, and even later in their adult life. And I think, that's probably, well, at least from what I've heard, it's because in terms of masking and everything, girls are learning to do it more quickly, and so that leads to them not being diagnosed when they're younger. And that was just like something interesting that I didn't know about, because
I think so there wasn't that long ago when researchers who studied autism would only study boys and men because they felt like autism is a male condition. We know that to not be true. Still, it's a 4-to-1. So there are girls with autism. The common prevalence difference is that there's 4 boys for every 1 girl diagnosed with autism. There have been studies that have tried to eliminate all of the factors that you're talking about, which is like diagnostic disparity. We don't know enough about the features of girls. Girls aren't diagnosed until later. Even if you take those into account, there's still a diagnostic disparity. So there's something going on. Either females are less likely to get diagnosed for biological reasons, or males are more likely to get diagnosed for biological reasons, in addition to things like there may be some bias in terms of a clinician trying to diagnose a girl with autism, that some of that girls are just better at they just are. They develop social communication skills earlier and are more advanced in social communication. So maybe they are able to mask a little bit more until those social demands around elementary school start to really become so intense that they can't deal with it anymore, and some differences emerge. So those are definitely factors. There are things about females that we certainly have been understudied because there haven't been enough females in research, and that needs to change. So the NIH has made huge strides and said, you can't just treat autism as a male condition. You have to recruit, unless you're looking at, specifically in males, you want to know X, Y, and Z. If you're looking at autism in general, you have to include both males and females. And that includes in animal model studies as well. But still, we know less about females because there are fewer females in research. And you can see this becomes just like this circular kind of hamster wheel of okay, we don't have enough females. We don't know enough about females. We don't know enough to help females. Females are underserved. They're not showing up in research, so there's this circular thing that goes on that scientists are desperately trying to address. But there still are these biological factors, I think, involved in female diagnosis that need to be addressed, in addition to the other factors as well. Things like masking, just basic differences. Ever since the beginning of psychology, we've known that girls are different than boys. Why on earth would you expect them to show the same features? And that includes things like anxiety too, right? So there are more girls diagnosed with certain types of anxiety than, I say girls and boys. The actual term is assigned females at birth or assigned males at birth. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'm going to abbreviate it to boys and girls. And I'm sorry if that offends anyone.
And my next question was regarding the neurodiversity movement. So it's become a large conversation within the community. So how do you and how does ASF view and incorporate neurodiversity principles, in your life and at work?
Yeah, so neurodiversity is a concept where there's a number of different conditions, right? So it's not just related to autism. It can be ADHD. It can be, things like schizophrenia. It can be bipolar disorder. It can be a number of different psychological, psychiatric conditions that view it, instead of being a disorder, that it's a difference. So I think that holds a lot of merit in many different cases, right? So I believe that, yes, there are people who they are different and we should recognize them as being different. There are also people that have a disorder, that need help, that acknowledge they need help, that there are safety concerns, that there are medical concerns, that they have comorbid or co-occurring conditions that are part of their autism, right? So it's not just another gastrointestinal problem. It's part of the autism, but there's biological reasons and things that you can do to help people with autism. You can't just dismiss it. So there are people that are highly self-injurious who want to learn to speak, but need that support, whether it's medical or pharmacological or behavioral, where they do consider it a disorder. And I think we need to recognize that both exist, that neither is wrong. And I'm going to take a cue from a friend, Andrew Whitehouse, who's in Australia, who said that we need to be humble, right? So we really need to be humble about the fact that what we experience in our own lives may not represent all of the experiences of people with autism. And so we need to be humble and recognize that and understand that our own experiences do not necessarily reflect everyone's experience.
How do you balance the perspective of individuals who view autism through a medical lens and those who advocate for more acceptance?
Yeah, I agree that that's a tough pill to swallow. I will say, though, that the majority of people out there don't think that it's one or the other, right? So they don't think that it has to be if or then. What is that there's a computer programming thing. If or no. It doesn't have to be yes or no. You can have both. You can have people who deserve to be accepted and who you can appreciate for all the things that they bring, but also recognize that they have severe impairments and limitations and that they need medical help, that they need supports in a way that it isn't just about societal accommodations, that it's about actual supports and it's about actual interventions and medical treatments, right? So you can have both. And I think the majority of the people out there actually recognize both, that you can have both at the same time, but you can't necessarily say it has to be one or the other, right? So I think that when it's one or the other, I think that when you get into that, I think it's people that that's their own experience, and they honestly, genuinely believe that that perspective is the right one, and it may be the right one for themselves. And so we again have to be humble and recognize that the way one person views autism is not the way that the world community recognizes autism. And I think we also have to be a little bit less American centric and realize that, in Western cultures, like in Europe and the United States, and I should say North America and either some other countries, that we're very advanced in the way that we think and recognize autism, and other cultures in other areas of the world don't. And so we have to not just be humble about the way we recognize autism here in the United States, where I live, where you live, but also around the world. So, yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of the balance that I try to strike every time, is that there's, diversity in your own personal experience, and then there's diversity in the world's recognition.
What is your vision for the future of autism science over the next decade?
So I would love for researchers who aren't even involved in autism, right? So who are those engineers? Who are those computer scientists? Who are those app developers? To always consider people with autism, because you may go into your career thinking you're going to be developing a computer program. I mean, I have to tell you, back in the day, I was when I was an undergraduate, I was a vision researcher. So I was studying in a vision research lab, and I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is, better understand the visual system. That's great. I'm glad people look at us both. We both wear glasses. We need that. But we also need those people to think about disabilities, right? Especially people with autism. People with autism, some of them benefit greatly from glasses, but can't, the sensory concept, and for you and I who know about all the sensory issues relating to glasses, which I've been wearing them since I'm 13, so I've learned to deal with them. But, not everyone can wear glasses. So we need to develop methods to help people who can't wear glasses who have autism, and look at how that affects their interpretation of the world, right? Because if you don't see well, your world vision. And we also need to, like, I'm just rattling some things off here, but like app programmers, right? So I can't tell you the number of people whose lives have been changed through different apps, whether they're apps for developing telehealth, apps for monitoring different body systems, apps for, helping people get different prompts when they're in employment situations. I mean, there's apps for everything. So keep on developing the apps, keep on developing technologies. And for those scientists who are outside the field, consider going into the field of autism.
Is there any advice you'd give to young scientists and researchers interested in pursuing a career in autism research?
Yeah, so I would say get as much of a diversity of experience as you can, right? So if you're a basic science researcher and all you're doing is, running gels and working with, that's probably an antiquated thing, whether you're running gene assays or working with, something that's basic science, and you spend most of your time in a basic science lab underneath a hood, go out there and learn about the people that you're researching, right? So learn about what people are actually experiencing, go to a community event, work in a clinic. For those of you who work in a clinic and help people on a day-to-day basis, take a class about neurobiology, right? Because you're going to use it. So as much experience as you can get, you have as a student, even as an undergraduate student, you have these opportunities to take all these different classes. Take them. You know what I mean? Like, don't limit yourself to the things that are just within your major. Take a psychology class, take, an upper level statistics class, take all these different classes that interest you, and take a chance, and also get to know the community and get to know what you're doing, get all sorts of different facets. I know that's a big ask, is to just say, take the class, right? Most universities and most projects, you can take a class pass fail. So you don't have to necessarily worry about getting an A in it. You can take it and learn and not have to feel that that you're in on it. And also, don't ever like close off an opportunity. As much as you can say yes to things when you're a student, as much as you can also say no. Say yes to a different project, say yes to a different opportunity where you think you might learn something about autism or developmental disorders. So I don't know, that's my TED talk about that.
How can like families and individuals who are kind of looking through and navigating autism research findings determine trustworthy and compelling studies or interventions?
Yeah, so I'd like to say go to the Autism Science Foundation website, and I would encourage people to go to the Autism Science Foundation website because they are very heavily curated, and they're very well, they're scientifically grounded. But I realize that not everyone's going to do that, and also you get these pop-ups, this news, you go to this website to learn about what's going on in the election. The next thing you know, you learn about this new study, or you learn about this new finding, or a friend in the neighborhood tells you about it. I would say that if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So if they say this helps everyone with autism, first of all, nothing is going to help everyone with autism in the same way. So if it claims to be the magic bullet or the silver bullet, if you're a beer drinker, it's not happening, right? So it's going to be, things are going to work to a different level in each person. If something seems to be too good to be true, it probably is. And if something has just been found once and hasn't been replicated, then you need to be wary of it. So some of the studies that have been looking at some, I can name a ton of them, but some of them having to do with like, bathing in Epsom salts, or that there aren't even, rigorous studies. Also, just understand that not all studies are the same. A study can have 2 participants, a study can have 1,000 participants. So, they can have a design where they're designed to be able to tell what works from what doesn't work, which is called a randomized control trial. Or they can be influenced by things like people expecting to get a treatment and then they don't get that treatment, right? So if they expect to get a treatment, what is just the placebo effect? So if they think they're getting a treatment and they don't get it, does that in itself improve function? And what does that say about, whatever you're studying? And the same for everything, right? If it works in 10 people, it doesn't work in everyone. And so just understanding that there's a diversity of what works in people, and not being swayed too much about some of the kind of like some of like the things that seem to make the news because they're kind of trendy, or they're I guess glitzy and glamorous. They're new, they're untried. They're new and untried. Let them be tried. And you can also, I would encourage people to participate in research studies. So Autism Science Foundation has a website called Participate in Research. You can Google it. And it's a list of research studies that have been reviewed by different ethical boards that you can go on. You can search for them, whether they're online or in person. You can search for a particular area of interest, an age that you're interested in studying more. So, we really want people to participate in research and learn about those research opportunities, because it's through research that we get to know what works in different groups of people.
And is there anything you'd like to share about ASF's mission, plans, or your weekly podcast?
So just like you, I have a regular series. It's called the ASF Weekly Science Podcast. They're deliberately short. I try to keep them to about 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes I go over. But they are designed to provide families and other scientists who may not be in any particular field to hear about kind of like the latest findings, or dispel myths or rumors that I've heard about online, or things that I'm hearing. Sometimes I read an article and I'm like, that's just not true, and I have to clarify it. The goal, though, is to help not just families and parents, but the entire community. So that community includes other caregivers, it includes clinicians, it includes therapists, it includes siblings, that this is something that affects the entire family. And so we need to be making sure that we support the entire family. And that includes, a broad group of people. So not only do we want to help those with autism, and that includes, for some people, finding a cure or the cures, because there's not going to be one of them, there's going to be several of them, but helping support people who may need a little bit of help finding a job, right? Or, and we've done projects on that, helping the right person find the right housing support, helping people navigate, relationships. So, every person has a different priority and a different need, and we want to help everyone, but we want to do it through science. Because I think there's a Ricky Gervais clip that talks about, like, if you turn back time, you could replicate you could replicate scientific experiments and scientific discoveries, right? So we could reprove that the earth is flat. We could reprove that, that the earth is round, that it's not flat, that there are, that genes make up who we are, that the body consists of different cells, like all of these different things that are important. We can replicate those through science, and we take that to heart and understand that science is really, we need to stick to science to better understand and help people with autism.
Dr. Halladay, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Your insights into autism research and the work of ASF were very precious, and I truly appreciate your passion and expertise.
Thank you so much for doing this. I know I am part of a very elite, smart, and I'm very honored to be part of the group, I guess I should say, of people that you've interviewed. So thank you. Oh, well, email me, and anyone who wants to email me, my email address is Halladay, AHALLADAY @ autismsciencefoundation.org.